Before we continue, a brief but important note. This channel provides psychological education and reflection. It does not create a therapeutic relationship, and it is not a substitute for individualized mental health treatment. If you are experiencing emotional distress or a crisis, please consult your licensed healthcare provider or contact local emergency services in your area. Hi everyone, this is Dr. Grandma B, Dr. Bachmeyer's avatar, and welcome to my channel. You Got This. Today's video is the first video for the channel You Got This. It is also the first of a series called All Things Psych. My vision for this channel is to cover a vast and wide area of terrain that sifts across psychology topics, as well as more metaphysical and spiritual or soul-based topics through a variety of series. If you stay with me, over time, your own insight and perspective will expand. As we walk this together, please write any questions you might have and/or suggest topics that you are very interested in, because Dr. Bachmeyer will start live as soon as she has enough people who are interested in engaging. Today we will talk about something that keeps a lot of us up at night: overthinking. You know the feeling. It's 2 in the morning and you're replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. Did I say the wrong thing? What did they mean by that? What if it all goes sideways? You're not solving anything. You're just spinning, and you know it, but you can't stop. This is overthinking, and if it sounds familiar, you are not alone. In psychology, we have a more precise term for this: rumination. It's the tendency to repetitively and passively focus on distressing feelings and their possible causes and consequences, without ever moving toward a solution. It's the mental equivalent of pressing a bruise over and over. It doesn't heal anything. It just keeps the pain fresh. The good news is that because it's a habit, it's something you can change. And today we're going to walk through 5 evidence-based steps to do just that. So, what is rumination really? It's important to distinguish it from productive problem solving. When you're problem solving, you're actively looking for solutions. You're brainstorming. You're weighing options. You're moving forward. Rumination, on the other hand, is passive. You're just cycling through the same thoughts and feelings again and again. It's often focused on the past. Why did this happen to me? Or the present. Why do I feel so bad? It's also different from worry, which tends to be more about the future. Worry is asking, what if this bad thing happens? Rumination is asking, why did this bad thing happen and what does it say about me? What's really fascinating and what makes this so important is that researchers have found rumination is transdiagnostic. It cuts across traditional diagnostic boundaries. It shows up as a core feature in a wide range of mental health conditions, from depression and anxiety to PTSD and eating disorders. So, when you learn to manage your tendency to ruminate, you're not just tackling one issue. You're addressing a root mechanism that fuels a lot of different kinds of psychological distress. You're getting at the engine, not just the exhaust. The most widely used framework for understanding rumination comes from Nolan Hoeksema's 2000 response styles theory, which proposes that when people feel distressed, they can respond in one of 2 ways. They can engage in ruminative responses, focusing passively on the distress and its causes, or they can engage in distracting responses, shifting attention to something absorbing and pleasant. People who habitually choose ruminative responses experience significantly worse outcomes over time, including longer depressive episodes and greater functional impairment. Overthinking is not just a psychological experience. It has a measurable neurological signature. Recent neuroimaging research has identified that rumination is associated with dysregulation in 2 key brain networks: the default mode network, DMN, and the cognitive control network, CCN. The default mode network is the brain's background mode. It activates when we are not focused on a specific external task, and it is associated with self-referential thinking, mind-wandering, and autobiographical memory. A recent study just last year in 2025 by Katayama et al. Suggests that in healthy individuals, the DMN quiets down when a person engages in goal-directed activity. However, in individuals who are prone to rumination, the DMN remains overactive and fails to disengage properly, creating a loop of self-focused, repetitive thought. The cognitive control network, by contrast, is responsible for directing attention, inhibiting irrelevant information, and switching between tasks. Katayama et al., 2025, found in a prospective observational study comparing cognitive behavioral therapy and pharmacotherapy that rumination in major depressive disorder is associated with impaired dynamic modulation between these two networks, meaning the brain struggles to shift out of the ruminative loop and into goal-directed, present-focused thinking. This neurological picture explains something that many overthinkers already know from experience. It is not a matter of willpower. Telling yourself to just stop thinking about it does not work because the brain's regulatory systems are not functioning optimally in that moment. Effective strategies need to work with the brain's architecture, not against it. The good news is that these neural patterns are not fixed. Both psychotherapy and targeted behavioral strategies have been shown to produce measurable changes in how the DMN and CCN interact, reducing the frequency and intensity of ruminative episodes over time. Understanding why overthinking is so persistent requires understanding the concept of habit formation. As far back as 2014, Watkins and Nolan Hoeksema framework of depressive rumination, which offers one of the most compelling explanations for why people keep ruminating even when they know it is not helping. The framework proposes that rumination begins as a goal-directed behavior. When something goes wrong, a relationship conflict, a professional setback, an unresolved uncertainty, the mind naturally turns toward the problem in an attempt to analyze it and find a resolution. This is adaptive. Thinking through problems is useful. The problem arises when the goal cannot be quickly resolved. We have known for a long while now, the same negative mood state recurs repeatedly in the context of an unresolved goal. The ruminative response becomes habitual. It is automatically triggered by the mood state itself, independent of whether the original goal is still relevant. The person is no longer choosing to ruminate. The rumination is being triggered automatically by a familiar emotional cue. This is why overthinking tends to happen most intensely at night, during transitions, or during moments of low external stimulation. All contexts where the habitual trigger, a low-level negative mood, is present, and there is no competing external demand to redirect attention. The brain follows its most well-worn path. Think of it like a groove worn into a hillside by water running down the same path over and over. Every time it rains, the water flows into that groove automatically. Changing the path requires deliberately redirecting the flow repeatedly and consistently until a new groove forms. That is exactly what the evidence-based strategies below are designed to do. Consider Alex, a 34-year-old project manager who describes herself as a chronic worrier. After a performance review that was mostly positive but included one piece of critical feedback, Alex found herself unable to stop replaying the conversation. For 3 days, she analyzed every word her manager had said. She rehearsed responses she could have given. She catastrophized about what the feedback might mean for her future at the company. She lost sleep. She became irritable with her family. She avoided her manager in the hallway. Alex was not a person with a diagnosed mental health condition. She was a high-functioning professional doing what millions of people do every day, using rumination as a substitute for action because the uncertainty of the situation felt intolerable. The critical feedback had triggered a familiar emotional state, self-doubt, which automatically activated her habitual ruminative response: analysis, rehearsal, catastrophizing. What Alex needed was not reassurance that the feedback was not that bad. She needed tools to interrupt the ruminative loop, redirect her attention, and engage with the situation in a way that was actually productive. The strategies in the next section are exactly what research shows works for people like Alex. Let's consider 5 evidence-based strategies that can help to decrease overthinking. One of the most counterintuitive but well-supported strategies, our strategy 1, for managing rumination is scheduled worry time, also called a worry window. Rather than trying to suppress ruminative thoughts entirely, which tends to backfire, as suppressed thoughts often return with greater intensity, this strategy involves designating a specific, limited time each day, typically 15-30 minutes, during which you are permitted to think about your concerns deliberately and actively. Strategy 2. When a ruminative thought arises outside the designated window, you acknowledge it. I notice I'm starting to overthink this, and then postpone it. I'll think about this during my worry window at 5 p.m. This approach works because it does not fight the habit directly. It redirects it. It also creates a clear boundary between productive reflection and unproductive rumination. Research by Li and Tang on rumination-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, RFCBT, supports the effectiveness of this type of functional analysis and cue management in reducing habitual ruminative responses. Third, and you have likely heard a lot about this, or you may already be practicing it, is mindfulness. The practice of deliberately directing attention to the present moment without judgment is one of the most extensively researched interventions for rumination. A systematic review and meta-analysis by Mao et al. Back in 2023 examined 37 randomized controlled trials and found that mindfulness-based interventions produced a significant reduction in ruminative thinking, with effects comparable to those of cognitive behavioral therapy. The mechanism is straightforward. Mindfulness trains the cognitive control network to interrupt the default mode network's ruminative loop by redirecting attention to a present moment anchor, the breath, physical sensations, sounds in the environment. This is not about emptying the mind. It is about noticing when the mind has wandered into rumination and gently returning attention to the present. With practice, this becomes faster and easier. Even brief mindfulness practices, 10 minutes per day, have been shown to reduce ruminative thinking over time. The key is consistency, not duration. I have worked with very busy professionals who really don't have time or are not in an environment where they can go sit in a quiet place for 30 minutes to meditate. However, they can watch the fan a bit, paying very close attention to every detail while listening to a speaker during a morning meeting, or count the 6 seconds as they breath in and 5 seconds as they breath out for a set of 6. Find a picture in the back of the speaker to examine every part of. Sometimes even just 1 or 2 minutes can really help you refocus. Or if you cannot sleep at all, literally coloring in a positive affirmation coloring book, paying very close attention to staying in the lines and only focusing on the coloring project can actually help. And we all have heard about that short 10-minute walk. Honestly, it works. Our fourth strategy, one of the most effective ways to interrupt a ruminative loop, is to engage in an activity that demands enough cognitive resources to crowd out the rumination. This is the principle behind behavioral activation, a component of both CBT and RFCBT that involves deliberately scheduling engaging, meaningful activities, particularly during times when rumination is most likely to occur. The activity doesn't need to be elaborate. It needs to be absorbing enough to require genuine attention, a conversation with a friend, a physical activity, a creative project, cooking a new recipe. The goal is to provide the brain with a competing demand that is strong enough to redirect the default mode network away from self-referential rumination. Watkins and Nolan Hoeksema noted that behavioral activation works in part by improving mood, which removes one of the primary contextual triggers for habitual rumination. When the mood-based cue is reduced, the automatic ruminative response is less likely to be triggered. The difference between this and mindfulness is subtle. Mindfulness asks us to be mindful of when our thoughts are not helpful, when they are looping, if you will, and shifting focus to something that will direct our mind into the here and now, at the time we notice the cognitive distress, whereas behavioral activation has more intention behind it in that it is strategically planned. For example, if you have employed all of the sleep hygiene hacks that you have been taught and you are still wide awake at 2 a.m. ruminating, tossing and turning, and miserable, and this has been happening repeatedly for several days, lean into it. If you do have a supportive friend show can sign up for this, schedule a 2 a.m. call to discuss a book or a TV episode that you are both watching, or start that creative project that you had been wanting to do, set it up, and plan on it. Yes, at the very time you know you will be ruminating. Something to keep in mind, whatever is bothering you will pass. This is a temporary situation, and the more time off your mind has from rumination, the more energy your subconscious mind has to actually solve the issues, and your awakened mind has to notice opportunities that might change it. This mental rest might very well result in your falling asleep one night and staying asleep for a good amount of time to get the REM and deep regenerative sleep that will really help combobulate you. We will address sleep in another video, but the point here is, don't be afraid to work outside the box. Often, however, if we are aware of what our mind is doing, we will notice the rumination starts well before bedtime. If we can identify the onset times, we can schedule an activity that will require our mind to focus, and that will likely help us actually follow our sleep hygiene practice. Finally, our fifth approach or intervention to try is expressive writing. Spending 15-20 minutes writing freely about a distressing experience, including thoughts and feelings, has a robust evidence base as a tool for reducing rumination. The mechanism appears to involve cognitive processing. Putting thoughts into written language forces a degree of structure and organization onto what might otherwise be a chaotic loop of unformed thoughts. This process of narrative construction helps the brain move from passive rumination to active meaning-making. Importantly, expressive writing is most effective when it includes both emotional expression and cognitive processing, not just venting, but also exploring what the experience means and how it connects to larger patterns in one's life. Research as far back as 2021 by Ernig in this area has demonstrated reductions in intrusive thoughts and rumination following structured expressive writing exercises. And again, if rumination is keeping you awake, it can also be helpful to simply write down everything that is on your mind, how you feel about it, what you really want to say to so-and-so, why you feel this or that, what is fair, unfair, etc. Get it all out. The mind is trying to process, and it likes to process linguistically. If you then make a commitment to continue to write at a regular time every day for a few days or a few weeks, you may likely find your thinking is clearer, your mood is better, and so is your sleep. If you have found this information helpful and/or interesting, consider subscribing to this channel and giving me a like. Considering this is a brand new channel, if you are feeling generous, put a positive comment in the comments section below. This will help grow the channel. And if you know someone who can benefit from hearing this, be sure to share. Thanks you so much for joining me today. I hope you will come back next week for another short All Things Psych.